virtual coffee and convos. Did you know that it is Adopt a Cat Month? Yep, every June is Adopt a Cat Month. And it was perfect timing that my friend and creative artist member Deb Almy here found this little creature by her house and adopted him. And I'm also here with Erica Irish, who is a veterinarian here at All Care Animal Hospital. I'll put the links in for you later on at the end. And we're just going to open this up to find out what we need to do to adopt a cat, why adopt a cat, what's the difference between adopting a kitten and a cat, and basic care. And Deb?
Yes.
Introduce Sebastian. I'm getting off frame now.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Deb Almy, and about 4 weeks ago I heard a screaming in my backyard by the privacy fence, and I went out and found this little 4-week-old kitten just sitting by the fence, just screaming at the top of his lungs. I reached over and I picked him up, and he looked at me like, "Oh, hi, there you are." And it's been love ever since. So he is now almost 8 weeks old, and it's been remarkable to watch his growth and development from the tiny little kitten who could barely walk to this ferocious beast that attacks toys. In fact, his name is Sebastian T. Beast. And anyway, we're with Dr. Irish today, and she's going to tell us about adopting cats.
Yes. So, well, it's nice to be here. If you're like a lot of other cat owners, you probably end up getting your own like cat or kitten in the same manner that a lot of us have, where they kind of adopt us in a way that they just appear on your doorstep, whether it's just walking into your apartment in college, like my cat Moose, or just being found in storm drain or on the street or something like that. And the thing about cats is that, a lot of feral cats especially, is that they will breed year-round. But there is what we call the kitten season, where during the springtime, when the weather gets a little warmer and the days get longer, that mama cats are a little bit more active, and so we have this upsurge of kittens, like this character, that just is come out of nowhere. And so, unfortunately, a lot of shelters will get overrun with those kittens, especially very young ones. The ones that are about 8 weeks and younger need a lot of extra care when they're taken away from their moms. And so that's, kitten formula every few hours and making sure that they're assisting them with going to the bathroom and things like that. So it can be quite the undertaking. And it's unfortunately something that a lot of shelters don't have a lot of manpower for, because they're so busy all the time with this influx of kittens especially. And so it's important that if you do find very young cats, you bring them in to have them aged to, yes, that's right, to figure out how old they are and what kind of care they're going to need. But try not to bring too many litters to shelters to overburden them. But once they get to about 8 weeks of age, it's usually a good age to be away from their mamas. They don't need much milk anymore at that point, and they're able to get on actual kitten food, a combination of wet or dry food, whatever they like. And then they start their first rounds of preventive care, which is very important whether you're a kitten or a full-grown cat. When we start them out, most of our kittens and new cats here, they'll come in for an exam to make sure that they don't have anything that could potentially spread to other animals in the household or to ourselves, because we can actually transmit a lot of diseases. Kitties can share upper respiratory infections with one another, and even adult cats. So you'll get things like eye discharge, sneezing, and nasal discharge. Thank you. And so you want to make sure that they don't have any signs of that. They can also have what we call ectoparasites, mites, fleas, and things that live on the skin. Very nice. That can also pass on to other cats and can actually bite people too. So they can get really nasty skin infections. They can get fungal infections like ringworm, and that's transmissible to people and pets too. And then intestinal parasites like worms, roundworms, hookworms. Those are all ones that are a very real risk to us and to our other pets. Where are you going?
Can someone rescue me
fear
from the ferocious beast?
Exactly. So on an exam, we can look for a lot of those things, and then we'll collect a stool sample to make sure that we don't have that going on with these characters. And if they do have those illnesses, then we can treat them with antibiotics for infections, really good preventives like flea and tick and heartworm prevention is super important, and the dewormers to make sure that they don't have any worms going on too, because that can be really rough stuff. And it can make them very sick, because some of them can actually feed off blood too, and they can get very anemic. I bumped you on the head, I'm sorry.
And I do want to say that is when I found him, the first thing I did was contact somebody I knew, my daughter, who works at a vet's office, and he went the day I found him to the vet to be sure that he was healthy enough to be in my household and not bring anything to my other animals at home.
Exactly. And then there's even some illnesses too that are feline specific that you should be wary of, like feline leukemia and FIV, which is feline immunodeficiency virus. And it's kind of like HIV in people. And those viruses can be pretty lifelong and cause a lot of problems and may decrease their life expectancy. So it's important to make sure that they're tested for those things. And then there is a vaccine for feline leukemia, which is great. FIV, not so much, but it's through very deep tissue bites. So if you have, usually not in kittens, but in adult cats, you need to be wary of that, especially if your kitty goes outdoors and is around other cats with unknown health status. But once you come in for your first visit, even adult cats who've not had vaccines before, and especially kittens, will need to have their vaccine boosters. So with kittens, as they grow, they'll be old enough for certain vaccines, like the rabies vaccine, of course, gets done around 16 weeks of age usually. And then by the time that they are old enough for those vaccines and things, we'll talk about things like spaying and neutering to help decrease the pet population. And that's especially how we get, so many feral cats, and why there are so many great trap and release programs out there to help to bring down those feral cat populations. And then now the nice thing about kitties and adult cats from shelters is that a lot of this stuff is already on board. So you don't have to worry about, I gotta bring them for the first shots and their boosters, I have to get them spayed and neutered. A lot of those come with the cat when you get them from the shelter. So the cost is included in the adoption, which tends to be pretty reasonable finance-wise. You might still need to bring them to a veterinarian afterward just to establish and have a regular doctor for when things do pose a problem, and especially if you need training because you are so, but this is normal kitten behavior.
Yes.
Like most house panthers, they can be really, really energetic and but a lot of fun. But that's pretty much your health side of things. And then there's a lot of other things you need to think about when they are at home too. So litter boxes are super important. These little guys, once they hit about 7 or 8 weeks, most of them are they take to the litter box like it's second nature, like duck to water almost. And so there are different litter types out there. Some kitties prefer certain types of texture of litter or substrate. And
we were having that problem. He was not using the litter box at first and was having issue. And I did find that there is a litter out there that is designed for kittens and has certain herbals in it that encourages them to use the litter box. And he has not had a problem since.
That's really good. And then even litter box types too can be important. Some of them like the very low boxes, some like the ones that are hooded or covered so they have a little privacy. And then the location can be important too in your house, where if you have a kitty who's having trouble using the box, try to keep it in a quiet area where there's not a whole lot of traffic too. Because if it's near a washing machine that goes off balance, or an area where there's a living room and a lot of people, they may be a little more averse to using that box when it's a scary area and they can't do their business. So that's pretty important to keep in mind with these guys. And then of course, we talked a little bit about nutrition. I mentioned some of the kitten foods, adult foods, and things like that. You basically want to feed for the appropriate life stage. So kittens need a lot more calories than adult cats do, at least 3 or 4 times the amount of calories per kilogram of body weight. So in this case, you get really high density, high calorie type foods for these characters up until they're about maybe 10 or 11 months of age, when they're usually done growing around that time. And then adult cats can go with your standard adult food, and your senior cats, there are senior foods. There's a lot of different favorites out there. A lot of the over-the-counter foods they have at most pet stores are pretty reasonable and good track records. You can always ask your vet which food they're going to like best and which one they feel has a pretty good track record with quality control and research and things like that. Most kitties like a combination of foods, like dry and wet. Wet food is great because cats are really good at concentrating their urine, so wet really benefits the kidneys. But then dry food really helps the teeth because cats are no stranger to dental disease when they get a little bit older. And then, of course, the occasional treat is okay too, but they can get really chubby if they have too many treats. So you want to make sure they've got a nice, slender figure. And like you have a really good figure, my dear. I don't mind saying you're quite lovely looking. Obviously, got growing to do though, so he'll be okay, I think. And then, as far as your routine care, your grooming and things like that, the nails should be trimmed as often as you can. Some kitties make great use of things like scratching posts and their toys and things like that, so they can keep them pretty short. But getting them used to having their paws handled at a really young age is important too. Otherwise, most are going to kind of.
He's real good at that. We've been playing with all four of his little feet, and as you can see, he doesn't seem to mind that at all. And he has a little jute tree, cat tree, which he climbs up there. Yeah. In fact, his food is on an upper level, so he has to actually climb up to get it.
Oh gosh.
And so he likes.
Did he fall asleep? I think he fell asleep in your arms.
Oh yeah, I'm mom. That's what we do. We play hard and then we fall asleep in mom's arms.
Oh no,
that's
cute. He's so cute. But yes, so good. So that helps with the nails. As for bathing, they don't really need to be. They're pretty meticulous groomers and are pretty good at doing so themselves. In some instances, you might have to bathe them for some reason, whether there's a skin disease your vet's concerned about, or something along those lines. But most of them are pretty clean little characters, so you don't have to worry about that too much.
And Doctor, one thing we started him on early was a harness.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard to find a little tiny kitten harness. This is actually a little rat harness that is on him. It was the only thing small enough that I could find.
Exactly.
But he wears it for about 10-15 minutes a day typically, and then we take it off. But we do eventually want to try to leash train him.
Of course.
Because we camp, and he is going to be a camping kitty.
I love that. You're going to have so much fun. What kind of adventures are you going to have, my goodness. But, anywho, talking about toys as well. We have this lovely spread of toys on the table here, but kitties obviously need a lot of stimulation. They've got a lot of high energy. And you're talking about climbing up everything, and yeah, they love climbing up high, some like hiding down low, but then toys like your little laser pointers and your stuffed toys and catnip toys and things like that are all really good for environmental enrichment, because there are a lot of kitties that over time they can get a little anxious, in their home if you're not there, and there are scary sounds and noises and things like that. Anxious cats, they can be anxious for any number of reasons and not even really show you the signs. It can be really subtle sometimes. They can't go out to you and go, "Mom, I'm anxious." But if they have any kind of urinary problems where they're going in places where they shouldn't, outside the litter box, or even just destroying things and destroying furniture and things like that, that can all stem from anxiety. And so it's super important to have plenty of environmental enrichment. And that might be your toys, that can be your scratching posts, and then even some of the calming supplements and things they have over the counter, like your Feel Away products. It has a calming pheromone in there, and so that's something you can use as an oil plug-in, sprays, wipes for their kennels, you name it. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there that aren't necessarily anxiety medications like like what you would get from a pharmacy. So those can all make a really big difference with them and just help them to be really well, happy, socializable adults when they're fully grown.
So 4th of July is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Could you address maybe what we can do to keep our animals more calm when our neighbors are blowing off loud, noisy things?
Besides going to your neighbors and pleading for them to not do that super late, which is next to impossible sometimes. Basically, it's all about trying to keep them as safe as possible. So that's going to be trying to use noise cancellation when you can. So closing your windows and your drapes so they can't see things in case it's a light thing that's bothering them, but the sounds, you can actually use things like TV or radio to help cancel out some of those sounds. So they've actually done studies on dogs and cats in shelters where they tried to look at what genres of music were going to be the most calming for these guys. And so I believe the genres were classical music, jazz, and reggae had the most calming effect on these characters versus, my personal favorite metal music made them really amped up and excited. Which we don't want to do the 4th of July, unless you're like me and my family, but that's neither here nor there.
1812 overture with dun 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 dun.
Boom! Right? Maybe not that classic. Something very calming like that can help. And believe it or not, so the University of Florida, my alma mater, they have kitties on hand for blood donation when they have critical patients. It's called the Blood Donor Cat Room. And in that room, they have all manner of environmental enrichment. So there's some of the things we mentioned, like the feel-away products, toys, scratching posts, these shelves that span the ceiling of the room. But more importantly, they have the smooth jazz station playing all the time in that room. So even walking in there to hang out with them, it's a very calming effect. So noise cancellation can be a really big part of it. And then some of the calming things like the feel-away supplements, and even talking to your doctor about some of the calming chews and things that they sell, like Composure, and I think even Zilkine might have approval in cats too. There are all kinds of elements out there that have some element that can help them relax. In severe cases, would you need to think about the actual anti-anxiety medication? And it's definitely a conversation for your vet, because they'll have that relationship with your kitten or cat and what's going to be safe for them and what isn't. So it's a pretty important, good question.
Yeah, I think he played himself
There
out
you
there.
go.
His personal favorite is soundscapes.
Yeah?
Yeah, he likes the different
Those are
alternative musics.
My mom does that for her cats, and then has kitty water fountains, and not just water bowls, but the fountains too, because some of the cats will hear the trickling sound and are kind of calm. Most of the young ones, though, will like bat
They
around water.
want,
Yes,
he's just recently started drinking water regularly all by himself.
that's important.
Yes,
Good.
the first couple of times he stuck his nose in it and snorted, and then finally he decided he would, I'm thirsty, I think I better drink some.
Mhm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Very good. And I think the only other thing I wanted to bring up too is some of the kitty precautions that you have to worry about, and not just with kittens too, but also adult cats too. So if you've got a pretty high landing, like a staircase, for example, and railing, you got to be careful. Some kitties can, walk through the railing and drop and fall from a terrific height, and you got to be careful with that. Actually, a lot of the things that we'll use for babies and toddlers, like baby gates and mesh barriers and stuff like that, can actually be used for your cats too. Some of them can even have a crate training kind of thing too, where if they get into all kinds of shenanigans and hijinks, like your house can be, Sebastian, then it's good to keep them somewhere safe where they can't get into lots of trouble. They love to chase things that are very string-like, so that could be your charger for your cell phone and plugs and things. But if they bite into those, they can actually get electrocuted. So you have to be very careful with having those around the house. Same with string too. If you're going to get them string toys, cool, but make sure that they're supervised. If they actually bite this off and eat string ropes, exactly, they can actually get a small intestinal obstruction, and unfortunately it can get really bunched up the intestines, and it becomes a surgical emergency. It's very life-threatening. So always be very wary of string, thread, and yarn, even though it's a common myth that they enjoy yarn. Actually, it's pretty dangerous for them if they ingest it. And my personal pet peeve, hair ties, like little elastic hair ties. If I catch any of those on the floor of my house, I gotta find the culprit who left it there, because we have had cats who've ingested hair ties, and again, very dangerous. And I guess collapsing furniture too, like recliners and things like that with very small
have to be
kittens.
very careful around the recliners.
Yeah, and these mini blinds, actually, I walked into my bedroom years ago and I had a little kitten, and it was hanging from its neck,
Oh my gosh.
just hanging and bobbing around. So I've learned to, as I see on the other one, you tie them up.
Yep,
You have to tie them up.
Or at least I've tucked mine back behind one of the blinds too, so they don't see this dangling toy and think, oh boy, this is great, and then try to attack it. So, and I think they may even have some forms of blinds that just don't have that element on there. So if you just can't stop them, change up those blinds, maybe drapes.
And crate training for a cat, I think, is extremely important for several reasons. Not just because it's a safe place for them. Then if you're traveling, they're already used to being in the carrier, so they don't have as much stress with as much meowing. And Sebastian will actually, in the evenings, he'll go and get in his own bed. Because he's like, okay, I'm done for the day, this is my safe place. And if the dogs start to bark, he'll run and go get in his carrier. So I do make sure it's available to him with the top open at all times so that he can go to his safe place.
Nice.
So,
I love that.
and at night too, when I'm sleeping, I'm not having to keep an eye open to see where he is. I know where he is at night, he's in his bed.
Exactly. That's super important.
So let's talk about adoption, since it is Adopt a Cat Month. Not always a kitten, but also a cat. And the differences between adopting a kitten and a mature cat.
Gotcha. Yeah, so with kittens, obviously they need a little bit more work. You know, it's closer to that time when they've just started to socialize with everybody, and so they can be really high maintenance and high energy. They're a lot of fun, but if you don't have the time for someone who needs that training and that level of socialization, then you might want to get an adult cat who's a little more mellow and less likely to get into the kinds of things that young kittens do, kind of like how you gotta watch out for toddlers, you know, putting things in their mouth all the time and things like that too. So the adults tend to be a little bit more mellow, and you also are aware of how big they're gonna get, because there's always the question, am I gonna have this petite little 9-year-old cat, or is it gonna be a 14-pound turkey by the time this skeleton is fully developed? So you never know. At least they don't vary as much as dogs do, at least in that respect. And then adult cats too, they need a lot of love, like there are so many kitties that are in shelters that they just really sometimes get looked over when it comes to the kittens. So by adopting an adult cat, you're doing them a big favor, and plus they don't need as many of the, boosters, series, and things like that too, with those cats. So that's basically the difference between the two of those.
What about bringing a cat into a home that cats already exist in? There is a concept called the dominant cat, and I've been amazed watching this because I figured that one would be the dominant,
Right.
but she isn't. The other one is.
That's what, I have 2 other cats. One of them responds to Sebastian with some curiosity, but they touch noses, but that's as far as it goes. She backs off. The other one is still in denial. She's pretending like if she doesn't see him, he doesn't exist.
Right.
But they are supervised, and that's another good reason for the pet carriers. If I'm not home, then I know that Sebastian is safe and not at the whim of my other 2 cats.
And really, it can be tricky bringing a new cat into the colony that they call it, and there's no knowing who's going to be whom in their social hierarchy. There are some cats that may just be wired for anxiety, and so no matter what you have going on, I have one cat who gets so anxious around everyone, he'd be probably better in a 1-cat household, but I can bring in one of my other cats for their vaccines and things like that. They come in to the hospital, they leave, and suddenly he is sniffing them when they've come home, and even though they will look the same and sound the same, they smell like the hospital, so it's not the same cat, and they're immediately on edge and hissing at one another and are just super upset. So it's cats can be very particular about who they'll interact with. Some cats might take to new cats right away, and it almost seems like they're adopting them as their own, which is great. But there are a lot of cats that will let you know their opinion of them, either not wanting to interact with them, which is great, but if you end up running into a situation like my cats, where 3 of our males get into fights with one another and start marking on my curtains and my furniture, where they've actually needed a combination of the calming elements that we mentioned, plus anti-anxiety medication because it had gotten that bad. So it can be tricky at first, and you can employ any of those calming elements and very gradually getting used to one another and one another's smell. You don't have to put them together immediately, but maybe behind a door or behind a gate or something like that, where they can smell one another and interact, and then go from there.
Sebastian's best friend is my almost lab. She is like, I say Rosie is kind of like the the aunt that everybody hates to see at Christmas time because she's the one that's wanting to kiss all the kids and hug them. And Rosie is constantly trying to wash Sebastian and trying to be very, puppy, treat her like a puppy.
Exactly.
One thing I understand from animals and dealing with them in the past is the cat doesn't realize that he's a cat, and a dog doesn't realize that he's a dog. So what happens is they're all part of one herd.
Right.
They're all part of one group. And that's who they'll socialize with, that particular group. They do not comprehend that you're a person, that's a dog, I'm a cat.
Exactly.
So the hierarchy is dependent upon the structure that's already existing, and as the animal gets older, where they find their niche in that structure.
Exactly.
So I understand that this is not a shelter. This is not where you would come to adopt a cat. You would go locally. Where in Leesburg would you locally go to?
Lake County Animal Shelter, Leesburg Humane Society, Lake County Humane Society, South Lake Animal League is a wonderful place as well. And some veterinary offices do have kittens available for adoption. So if you have a vet, you can call them and you can say, do you know of anybody that's got kittens? Has a cat that's had kittens, because then you know that that mama cat has probably been getting veterinary care and that the kittens are getting care as well. But I'm a strong advocate for adopting from a shelter.
Me too.
Those animals need a home. They need the love. They need the care that you're willing to give. And they're, most of the time you'll find they're extremely grateful. And they are grateful to have a home and someone to love them.
I mentioned this on the way here to Deb. When I lived up north, when I was a renter, I could not adopt a cat. And as soon as I purchased a house, I adopt 3. But is it as strict down here? Do you know? I mean, do you know what the requirements are to adopt a cat?
It depends. I mean, there are a lot of, at least when I was living in Orlando, some of the renters restricted you to a 2-pet policy, or maybe 1 pet, and there are some that want no pets at all. So it's pretty variable depending on who your landlord is and where you go.
I mean, the shelter would not rent. It would not let me take a cat because I was a renter and I did not own my own home.
I don't know. Would they limit something?
Are they like that, Autumn?
Not for Lake County. Hillsborough County used to do something similar. They changed their program.
Okay.
They would call the landlord before they would adopt out a pet to you, including dogs, to make sure they didn't have because if you adopt a pet, you get it home, you can't have it as automatic return, and it can mess with their mental state and their behavior state of the animals. They get confused, so they think they're leaving and then they come back.
Right.
But Lake County doesn't have that policy that I'm aware of.
Gotcha.
All right. But yeah, you should check with your landlord if you do, because there might be a pet deposit that you have to pay.
Or pet rent.
Yeah, in order to have it.
Rent a pet?
They do have those too.
I always thought that was a great idea. Find out if you're ready. Rent.
Well, actually, Lake County Animal Shelter does have a shelter break sleepover for their long-term resident pets that have been there for a while. You can take the pet home for up to a month, and then at the end of the month, if you want to keep the pet, you pay the adoption fee then. Or if you don't, if the pet doesn't work out in your household, you can bring it back and there's no concerns or anything. There's no money to return or anything, but they want to find out why so they can better target that pet to a different home. So they do have that program for dogs.
That's great. You're hearing the voice of
Autumn Perry, who works here at All Care Animal Hospital, who is my daughter.
Can you think of anything else that you would inform someone who wanted to adopt a cat or kitten?
Gotcha. No, I think that's everything. I think just one of the biggest things that kitties will deal with, 2 really big things that we see a lot of cats for here. One is that they can get overweight pretty easily, be very wary of what their waistline is looking like at any given time. They can be prone to things like urinary tract infections, diabetes, if they're overweight for too long. So always be wary of what they're looking like, and then talk to her about recommendations for, you start seeing very big waistline. And then the other thing too is, behavioral type issues. It used to be you chalk it up to a urinary problem, here's some antibiotic, and have a nice day. But a lot of it comes to things we mentioned before, their anxiety and their stress, where they will just stop using their litter box that they usually have been using this entire time. And those kinds of accidents, or in my case, fighting and marking all the time, those can be really real things that would make you want to give up on that cat. And the reason why a lot of shelters might have cats brought over to them for urinary and behavior issues, and no one really takes the time to look it up, figure it out. Exactly. So, but with a little, work, or in my case, medication once a night for my cats, it can make a huge difference. And I get to enjoy my time with Moose and Benjamin and Kenji because they have their medication. So I'm not having to come home and clean up pee and come home to a museum of odors every night after work. So very important. Anytime you have a concern like that, definitely bring it up with your vet, because if you're concerned about it, it should be something worth talking about.
That brings to mind two things. One is the sprays that are used to keep your cats off the furniture, and two, the sprays that are used to clean the odor. Do you have recommendations on that?
Gotcha. So like scat mats and sprays and things like that, they can work. They make them a little more nervous. I'd be very hesitant to use the scary sprays and loud sound type things. If it's in an area where it's close to their box or close to their food, because you wouldn't want them to associate that negative, scary thing with something that's supposed to be positive. Otherwise, you might have some concerns. But otherwise, it'd be a little bit harder to train cats than it is with dogs, where you say, hey, don't be on the couch. Okay, here's a treat. If you have a cat who's super food motivated, then that's fine. That classical conditioning can make a really big difference with what you want them to do, what you don't want them to do. Otherwise, negative reinforcement, they kind of can't put A and B together in their head, and they're like, oh, there's a scary thing up on the counter, but they would associate that with, I shouldn't be up on the counter.
I'm thinking more of the products that you spray on your furniture to keep the cats from jumping up on it.
Nature's Choice, I think it is. They have the
Cat Away
and stuff like that.
Repellent. I'm not too familiar with a lot of the kitty repellents that they have. I've only seen the thing with the noisemakers and the sprays too, that like go off like the little eggs that they sell in the pet stores that makes a loud psst kind of sound and blows air at them. But kitty repellents, no. I'm more familiar with like the Feel Away products that actually have an oil you can put on their scratching post, a pheromone that encourages them to scratch that rather than scratching the furniture. Exactly.
And now there are some kitty litters. If you're having problem with litter boxes, I strongly advise you to look at what's available with kitty litters. Read about them. There are products out there that have herbals in the kitty litter, or it might be just the size of the grain of the kitty litter. Some cats prefer different things. I've got one cat that won't use the litter box unless you use that specific kind of cat litter. And now with Sebastian, I found that they have a kitten litter that has herbals in it that encourages him to use his litter box. And I do keep a lower side, just like you said, because those big litter boxes are hard for little guys to climb in.
Exactly.
To make it as easy as possible for him to get in there and use that box. There was something else I was going to say too. I forgot what it was. Maybe I'll remember it. Old.
It's Monday.
This has been a ton of information. Thank you very much. Any last words before I
Adopt.
Yes. And spay neuter.
And spay neuter, please. There are too many kittens and puppies out there looking for homes. And I'd rather there be more homes than there are animals than the way it is now, where there are more animals than there are homes.
Yeah.
thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
This will be airing on the 19th, which is a Friday at noon for a watch party. I'll make sure that I get all your links and also include it. It'll be on Facebook Watch Party for the Leesburg Center for the Arts.
Nice.
And it will also be up on YouTube so that you can share it as an educational tool.
And I'd also like to thank Pat Gilmore for doing this type of thing every Friday and bringing these to folks because she works so long hours. It's not just sitting down taping it and putting it out there. There's a lot more involved in that. And Leesburg Center for the Arts, because they are the backbone behind what you're watching right now, these coffee and convos programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.